It's felt like years. Allow me to explain. It was a vivid summer day, and I had taken a short notice trip to Arizona, trying to find some relief from the tiresome sunshine state on the other side of the nation. I only decided to leave when I was hit with a rather heavy day at work. My boss decided to chew me out for running late, despite the massive car crash on the motorway. A customer yelled at me because they didn't know what a Gmail was. Yeah, because I can definitely control traffic. And yeah, I definitely want to explain to you what Gmail is. I hate working customer service, so I called in sick and caught a last-minute flight to Phoenix. Phoenix? Yeah, Phoenix. Nice and far away from the hell I called home. I wish I'd never decided to do that. Around 2 days into my trip, I decided to head up to Zion Canyon for some sightseeing. I'd spent a lot of time around the Grand Canyon and figured I should set some time apart to check out other places in the area. Besides, I've never been to Arizona before. Maybe I would take a hike. That one trail I had already read up on. Angel's Landing looked dangerous, but it would be something incredible to experience, and certainly worth it if I make the summit. I turned on Google Maps, and my rather shitty Android fumbled around with it, until finally, it picked up the location. The voice of a robotic woman began to speak. It was the damn GPS lady. She guided me through several backwater roads with twists and turns and rounded balance until she stopped with her final sentence. Head on Highway 89, continue straight for 184 miles. All right, seemed easy enough. As I finally approached the highway, I was absolutely in awe. No more buildings remained, only the wild, barren landscape of the Southwest. Mountains peaked in the distance, covered by desert shrubs. Old trailers and abandoned houses dotted the landscape. Everything was so beautiful compared to the constant headache that was Florida. My eyes soaked up the desert views, relieved that for once, it wasn't just endless miles of swampland. I felt so isolated. I was free from civilization for miles, but something was wrong. The desert didn't feel real to me. The sun was too bright, the mountains too still, and the sky too blue. The whole landscape seemed too picturesque, as if it was straight out of a postcard. It felt as though it were all a facade to drag me into something, and it was not unlike something straight out of a fever dream. You know, those mornings as a kid when you wake up with a pounding headache and a sense of false reality. I've been driving for hours, and the scenery just seemed to remain stagnant. I was so sure I'd spend the entire damn day on the road, but the sun hadn't moved an inch. Was I hallucinating? God, when was this road ever going to end? Speaking of it, I'm still here. I've been driving on this road every day. It only keeps on going and going. I've been seeing the same road signs over and over. There's no civilization around. I've tried knocking on those trailer doors, but no one's ever home. And you know what else? Despite my solitude, I feel like I'm constantly being chased. I hate that feeling. That same feeling from when you're a kid, and you sprint up the stairs from the pinch of darkness, not daring to look back at whatever was behind you. That feeling when any source of noise in your house was enough to make you jump and run for your life. The source of the noise for me was the booming, and that feeling is always here. Every once in a while I hear a booming as if someone is going at it with a gigantic drum. I slowed my car down, and the booming is faster, closer, and louder. And that feeling, every time I slow, the feeling grows stronger, as if whatever it was is getting closer. It's like whatever that something is, it's hunting me down, almost testing. And every time I stop, the booming gets louder, as if it's targeting me. I don't know what that is, but I feel like it's dangerous. I don't know what chases behind me, but I know better than the kid who runs away from his basement door the first chance he gets, running away from that something. But that something is behind me. I don't know what it is, but it's got me trapped right where it wants me to be, and I can't get out. I've driven off cliffs and into rivers, yet I wake up on the side of the road again to the same sight. My truck waiting for me to drive off again. I can't even commit suicide. The place won't let me. I've tried communicating through whatever internet I could scrounge up on my phone, but I don't even know if anyone has seen my cries for help. The screen just shows up blank, save for my own words written in desperation. No one will ever answer my texts. No one will answer my calls. I will never see any other cars, only me. I never get hungry or tired or thirsty, only trapped. It's like time hasn't passed. Time hasn't passed. Everyone is gone. Something's chasing me, and I'm still writing this. I think I'm in the same spot for too long. The noise is only getting louder, and now something is right behind me. Time has not passed, and I need to get out now. For a while now, ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with Point Pleasant, West Virginia. My dad used to tell me stories of the Mothman and how it terrorized a small town back in the 60s. It's because of his stories I started doing research on other cryptids and urban legends like skinwalkers, wendigos, the Jersey Devil, and many others. Point Pleasant was the closest town to me, so I made it a goal to drive down there for a weekend on the 53rd anniversary of the first Mothman sighting. On Friday, November 15th, I picked up my stepbrother and stepsister, and we headed down to West Virginia. They were both skeptics. They didn't care about the legend. I honestly don't know why they even wanted to go in the first place. We made it to the small town around 3 p.m. and checked into the Low Hotel. A couple of hours after going into the Mothman Museum and checking out the other small shops, my two friends Katie and Joanna made it down for the weekend trip as well. We all met at the Mothman restaurant, where some locals knew we were from out of town and enjoyed us talking about the small town. One of them asked, "You folks go check out the TNT area yet?" I responded with, "Not yet, but it's on our to-do list." This is when our group thought it would be a great idea to go there at nighttime and head to the area where the Mothman was sighted by the two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallet. We bought lights and headlamps and headed to the area at around 8:45 p.m. We approached a gate that was blocked off so no vehicles could pass by, and decided to get out of the car and walk into the wooded area. It was really dark out, and all we had to guide our way was our lights we brought, and my GPS leading us to one of the bunkers. We made it to an opening in the forest where I believe the factory's building once stood before getting demolished. It was at this time my stepsister and Joanna saw a pair of eyes staring at us from the woods. Whatever it was turned around and walked back into the forest. They assumed it was a big animal, and for our safety, we headed back to the car. As we passed the gate, I noticed it could be lifted with two people, and we decided to open it and head in with my car. As soon as we passed the open area, we found a bunker to our right, parked the car, and went inside to get some pictures. Our one friend was beginning to get a little too uncomfortable, so for her sake, I told her we would come back when it's daylight, so we could be more aware of our surroundings in the woods. We got back in the car, and I pulled back into the road. Before we could take off, Katie and I told the group we were going to close the fence since it was closed for a reason. We got out of the car, which was facing away from the fence, and the only lights we had were my brake lights on. We picked up the fence and slowly started moving it back into place. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the bunker we were just at. They easily stood 6 to 7 feet off the ground, and it was just staring at us. I stopped moving and I said, "Katie, do you see that?" She responded with, "What?" and looked up and saw the eyes too. The moment we both were looking at the eyes, it became red and started coming toward us. I yelled, "Katie, run!" And as she screamed and ran for the car, the creature pursuing us let out this terrifying roar, nothing I have ever heard in my life before or since. As Katie ran, she fell and hit the ground hard, and I didn't move till I knew she was safely inside. As soon as I got her in, I ran. The eyes were easily 15 feet away from me at this point, and I jumped in the car and pressed on the gas as hard as I could. The road to get out of the TNT area is a 35-mile-per-hour road, and I was easily doing 100 to get out of there. We were very shaken up about this event, but it honestly felt like history was repeating itself 53 years ago. Once we got back to the hotel, we gathered our thoughts, and I tried to think logically about what we saw. We looked up wildlife local to the area and tried to compare the noise, but nothing matched. I'm not saying it was the Mothman or Sheepsquatch or Wendigo, but something about the way it stood and started coming towards us made me think otherwise. My group and I have decided to invest in tech to record our cryptid hunts next time we go. We want to return back to Point Pleasant soon to try and capture what we saw on camera. Cryptid hunting is no joke. What we felt was genuine fear, and we could have died that night. Yes, it might have been a bear, it might have been a mountain lion, but you've got to be careful. You don't know what's out there waiting in the dark for its next meal. I grew up in a very rural area of the Deep South and spent most of my time riding horses alone in national forests and expensive private properties that bordered our house. There was an old abandoned house 2 miles ride through the woods from me. I often rode by it on my journeys through the woods. Sometimes I tied my horse up, went inside and explored, but there was nothing really of interest. There was just trash and things that looked like electricity bills from the 80s. I think an old woman used to live there based on some pictures that I found. Time went on, and I went away to college, taking my horse with me. I no longer rode past this abandoned house. After graduating from college and my horse and I moved back home for a little while, I decided to go back to explore the area again. So I rode my horse the 2 miles through the deep woods to get to this house, which itself is probably 1,000 feet from a lonely gravel road that cuts through the forest. It is very secluded and almost creepy. The house is about 3 miles away from a paved road. I'm less brave than I used to be, so when I entered the house, I felt out of place and slightly scared. But I used my cell phone light to explore the rooms anyway. A lot was just as I remembered. But right as I was about to leave, I found a half-skeletal calf in the corner of the entry room. I have no idea how the calf got shut inside a building. The doors were firmly shut when I approached it, and also the screen door opened one way, so it was impossible for both to be open at once for some creature to accidentally wander in. Furthermore, the nearest cow pastures were a good bit away from the house. I left the abandoned house with the image in my head of some deviant cruelly trapping a calf in there for sick purposes. I hope I never have to meet the sickos who did that. This happened sometime around 10 or 11 years ago, and I still remember every detail like it happened to me last night. My mom, my friend, and myself were driving home from a concert super late one night, sometime around 1 a.m. We were driving through some mountains. I think we were around Harrisonburg, Virginia, or somewhere near the West Virginia border. I'm not exactly sure. The roads were seriously winding, and it was so dark you could go only a couple of feet ahead of you. The roads were seriously winding, and it was so dark you could only see a couple of feet ahead of you, thanks to the headlights of the car. My friend was asleep in the back seat, and she luckily didn't witness any of this. I, on the other hand, was sitting in the front seat, trying to help my mom stay awake. Everything was going as expected, just normal driving when, literally out of nowhere, this huge, when I say huge, I mean probably around 6 feet long but still very big, thing flies directly in front of our car. Somehow, I was able to really see a lot of this thing, even though this whole thing lasted maybe only 10 seconds in total. But this creature was, like I said, about 6 feet long. I only say this because it was longer than the front of our car. It had these big black and dark gray wings that were like bird-like, or maybe even moth-like. They were against the sides of it, kind of like when you put both of your arms down by your side. It was flying sideways and was right in front of our headlights, so that would mean it was only a few feet away from the ground. And it was flying incredibly fast. We probably should have hit it, considering we were going 60 miles per hour, but somehow we didn't. The creepiest and most disturbing part of it was that the body looked so human, and it had this gray and white bald head. My mom and I both saw the exact same thing, and thank goodness that she did see it because I'd feel even crazier if she didn't see it. We kept driving and never stopped. We still to this day keep trying to explain it away. Maybe it was a bat or an owl, but I've never seen a bat or an owl that big. There's just no way. I did some research, and years ago in the 1960s, there were a ton of Mothman creature sightings around West Virginia. I guess he's back, or maybe he never left. I used to work security, and several years ago, I was assigned to a remote construction site where a summer camp was being built. It was quite literally in the middle of the woods, roughly 4 or 5 miles into the forest, with only a single access road that they've been using to haul equipment and supplies and such. My job was to provide overnight security, doing a foot patrol of the entire area. The patrol covered around 2 miles roughly once every hour, and then going back to my post, which was a tiny wooden shack not much bigger than a payphone booth, to fill out my logs. Other than the occasional black bear, coyote, or bobcat, it was a very boring assignment with one exception. I was doing a routine patrol one night near the end of my shift, around 3 a.m. or so. I had just passed the gate where the access road enters the site when I heard an extremely loud, piercing scream that seemed to have come from a distance down the road. It sounded like a woman screaming in absolute terror. And at this point, I need to clarify, I hear bobcats pretty often around my house, and they can sound creepy while working in remote areas. They definitely have a distinctive and creepy scream. But there is absolutely no way that this scream was a bobcat. I immediately took off sprinting as fast as I could in that direction. I didn't hear anything else after the initial scream, but about a quarter of a mile down or so, I came upon a car parked just off the side of the road. There was no car in sight when I had come through on my way to my shift, so it had to have been parked there fairly recently. Not running, and with no lights on and no doors open or anything. I called out to see if anyone was there, but got no reply. I looked around the general area and didn't see anything. Needless to say, I was pretty goddamn sketched out at this point. I ran back to my post and reported what I'd seen to the local police since there wasn't really anything else I could do. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. I've never found out whose scream I heard or what caused it. The car was apparently owned by a guy who lived in the area, but I never heard why he was there. My supervisor suggested that maybe I'd heard a mountain lion or another animal screaming, but I've heard those animal sounds before, and although they're definitely freaky, there's no mistaking an honest-to-God human scream. I used to regularly walk portions of the Appalachian Trail and usually take a week or two by myself. Anyway, at one point I was coming over a pass and saw a figure on the trail ahead. It seemed to be a lone young woman. It's twilight, and the moon will be bright. I have so many rechargeable lamps, and I yell ahead, "Ahoy!" She doesn't break stride or pause. Being on the trail, people are friendly and cooperative. She looks like she's had a bad day and no tent. Now sure, I like to sleep under the stars, and I usually hike with a hammock and a rainfly, but something seemed off. We were way out here. The last trail shelter was a few miles back, and we were on a very heavy bush cliff. Know where you want to camp for the night. I figure she might be wary of strangers at night, so I keep my own pace and don't really pay much more attention to her until she disappears over the next pass. And I realize she's walking this trail, now dark with some moonlight but heavy tree cover, without a torch, lamp, or any personal light source. I'm getting worried about this girl. Remember, we are walking with a sheer cliff face a few yards away from us, and conditions aren't perfect. Roots, dirt, mud, moss, rocks, anything can trip you up. So I pick up pace and hurry over to the pass. She's nowhere, and there's a clear line of sight probably 200 yards ahead, and she's nowhere to be seen. But then I see a torch in the distance. A red lamp, actually. There are two. Now that I'm getting closer, I flash my torch, and they flash theirs. I call, "Ahoy!" and a man and woman respond. We finally meet up and do the whole meet and greet, exchange trail names, and chat for a bit about what's ahead in our paths since we were walking opposite directions. I say to the girl, "You worried me back there. I saw you walking without a light, and then you disappeared over the pass." She looks confused. "What are you talking about?" I explained everything, and she said that she hadn't seen anyone on the trail for at least 3 miles. There was no one reported missing, no abandoned campsites, nothing. I followed up with state police and rangers. Nothing. Who the hell was on the trail ahead of me, walking at night with no light, minimal gear, and then to just suddenly disappear when there's only one way to go along the trail? I'm still clueless. This was maybe 7 or 8 years ago when I was 20, and in a really bad way. I'd been screwing up my life via illegal substances for the past year, but after a lot of help, love, and luck from friends and family, finally, I was getting my head cleared and was almost there, above the black tar. How I had gotten myself into it, I decided to get out of the city and drove 2 hours out to a smaller town in Missouri, where Google Maps told me a small campsite by water was. I knew that there shouldn't be very many campers because it had just gone cold and was around 40 or so that night. Nearly there, as I'm driving down a misty morning road, just a picturesque straight 2-line highway, there's this object laying in the road about half a mile up. I slowed my approach and then see this shaggy mutt just hanging out. I stopped and rolled down my window right next to it, and she came up, licked my hand, and wagged her tail away. She seemed to expect something of me. She had no tag, no tattoo, or chip, and was just a dog with no name. Naturally, I popped open the passenger side door for her, and she was so glad and hopped in. So now I've got this dirty but friendly companion with me for my little excursion. The dog with no name. The entrance to the campsite was only a half-mile further. As I suspected, there was no one around. I just dropped a 5 in the owner box and picked the closest site to the spring. I set up my tent, the same one I did set up for years with my dad as a kid, collected some dry sticks, and started a fire. The dog with no name just circled the campsite, looking content enough to sniff some leaves and roll around in the mud. I went to check out the river, land about 30 feet wide. He had a man-made stone down that you could walk across. To the west was the deeper part of the river, sort of pooling at the dam, then maybe an 8-foot drop to the east into calm streams. Instantly I wanted to go on, cleanse myself, symbolize, baptize, whatever. I grew up Catholic, so that kind of thing runs through my head. To this day, though I'm far from religious. The dog sees me scoping out the whole time from the campsite. I can't bring myself to do it though. I'm hugely disappointed in myself. Well, it's cold, it's brackish, and I don't have a towel, so I go back up to smoke some cigarettes, eat hot dogs, and pet the dog with no name. Night falls quickly after all this meditation, and I roll inside the tent to sleep. My buddy sleeps inside the tent next to the sleeping bag. This dog was awesome. And I wake up in the middle of the night for no reason I can't put my finger on. And my main source of warmth, the dog with no name, he's missing. I slide out the tent, as I assumed I left it unzipped, and there she is, just sitting there, waiting for me in the pitch black, wagging her tail. I feel very strange, like something is happening here, and something is telling me to get back down to the river and do the damn thing. We walk down the short trail together, surrounded by Missouri black. It's even colder than before, but I start to strip anyway. Standing on the chilly stones of the dam, the dog with no name sits on the edge of the river again, just watching me, a slight way. I'm now stark naked as can be, staring into this black pool that looks like supernatural ink. I should mention here that I hate swimming in water I can't see the bottom of. It and my fearful imagination takes over and I freak out. In other words, I stand naked on the dam for over 10 minutes before I finally muster up the balls and just dive into the blackness. It was cold as hell and scary as hell. When I came up for air, I was thrashing wildly back towards the dam, scrambling back onto the slick stones. I shook off my hair and was surprised how the adrenaline helped me keep warm. As I was picking up my shoes and clothes, I looked over for my buddy at the river's edge. The dog with no name was nowhere in sight. Back up at the campsite, I look around, gently whistling and that kind of thing. And more than woken up by now, so I go ahead and start another fire as dawn is just starting to break. I have another hot dog for breakfast and figure I might as well pack up and leave. This trip feels more than complete. I start my car up and check my phone. There is an hour time difference between the two. This happened to fall on daylight savings time. I'm not calling it a supernatural rip-in time, but it's funny. It was the night this went down. In fact, the exact time would have been around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. The dog disappeared. So the dog never showed up again, and I never did heroin again. My brother and I lived in a neighborhood in Idaho when we were kids. The school to my house is just a few blocks, so we always just walk because it's close by. One day I had to stay after school because I needed help on some homework. I'm the eldest, and at the time my brother is afraid to walk home alone, even if it's just a few blocks. I get annoyed and tell him to just walk home by himself, that there's nothing to be afraid of, and it's nearby. He goes, and I do my homework. After a few minutes, he comes back out of breath with a shocked look on his face. I can tell he got spooked and just told him to wait for me in the classroom. On the walk back home, he tells me that he saw a black Sasquatch-like creature going in circles around him super fast when he was walking. He then saw a brown Sasquatch hiding behind the shed near our house, looking at him and also running super fast elsewhere. I won't lie, I did start getting spooked by stuff he was telling me. Me being the big brother, I told him that if something comes, I will hit it with our backpacks. We make it home, and I start unlocking the door. I did it fast because I was kind of creeped out. My brother walks in, and as I'm about to walk in, I turn to see across the street a bright yellow Sasquatch-like creature looking at me. Then it turns around and runs away very fast. It was incredibly fast. I bolted and shut the door behind me, locking it. I'm totally freaked out and tell my brother that I saw one too. We call our mom and freaked out over the phone. She told us we've just seen too many horror movies. I have no idea what those things were. The fact that I saw a yellow one makes it even crazier, and I need to know if anyone else has ever encountered anything like this. I went camping with the summer program when I was 16. 12 other guys being managed by 4 adult men, and we were having a great time. S'mores, hot cocoa, campfire stories, the works. We all had to be in our tents and either sleeping or awake but quiet by 11. I was in a tent with 2 other guys, staying up later and just talking. Typical teenage guy stuff. As one guy's talking, I start to hear heavy breathing nearby, like someone has just been running and is out of breath. I ignore it and keep listening. I figure I'm just a weird kid hearing things, although one of the guys in the next tent is making the noise while he sleeps. Then we hear, "Please help," from outside. It didn't sound like anyone in the group. It sounded like an old man, out of breath. We all went dead quiet and listened to this guy's breath. Then he asked again, with a whimper at the end. I don't know what possessed this guy near the front of our tent, but he turned on a flashlight and opened the inner flap, but kept the outer zipped and looked out. We just see a pair of bare, old, and scant pale legs standing there. They looked like this guy had been walking nude through the woods for some time. He asked for help and kept standing there. We were all paralyzed with fear, but the guy at the front managed to say, "Keep walking down the trail. The ranger will be there soon." The guy stopped breathing and said, No rangers. They keep me here." It was at this point someone else finally spoke up. A chaperone came out of his tent with a flashlight. We cautiously asked him how long he'd been there and what happened to him. The old man didn't answer, just started sobbing and ran off into the woods. We saw by the flashlights that he was completely naked and emaciated. I lived in southern Oregon at the time, on a 30-acre ranch. Our property backed up to a river, and across from the river, there were woods. I came home from work one night to an empty house, and as I'm walking to the back door from my truck, I hear rustling in the bushes. We normally get a lot of deer traffic through the property, So naturally, I just come and yell, "Hey!" It wasn't a deer, though. Nothing ran away. Instead, I hear whatever it was come through the bushes, take 2 huge steps towards me, and take breaths, exhaling loudly and deeply, unlike anything I've ever encountered living out here. I froze up for a second, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized this thing was a lot bigger than I was. I ran inside, turned the spotlights on, but didn't see anything. I told people this story, and they always say, "Oh, it was a bear or an elk." I'm familiar with bear and elk sounds, and the only bear we have out there are skittish black bears. What do you guys think it could have been? The 2 steps towards me sounded like a man stomping as hard as he could, and the breathing was deep and guttural, almost like a bull.